Here is the formula for building muscle while intermittent fasting. It sounds like it's not even possible. How can you possibly build muscle when you're intermittent fasting? Well, it comes down to very strategic timing and understanding different mechanisms within your body. It's a lot more than just calories in versus calories out. And I'll come right out and say, calories in versus calories out matter. But it's so hard for us to determine when those calories actually matter. Right now, I'm not eating anything. Does that mean that I'm technically in a caloric deficit right now? If I was eating a Rice Krispie treat right now, would I technically be in a caloric surplus at this very moment in time? See, it all depends on when we eat. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is always train fasted. Okay, there are some circumstances in which you would not, but I want you to train in your fasted state. This is important, and we'll talk more about how you can orient the timing in just a bit. And I want you to stick with me through the whole video, but the reason I want you to train in a fasted state is because of the catecholamines. Okay, when you are fasting, your body's under stress, which means you're producing adrenaline, you're producing epinephrine. This sounds like a bad thing because it's fight or flight, but believe it or not, this is actually somewhat muscle sparing. What happens is when you trigger that catecholamine response, like you do when you're fasting or you do when you're working out, you're triggering your body to activate hormone-sensitive lipase and start burning fats for fuel. This burning of fat for fuel actually preserves some muscle. Okay, it makes it so that your body doesn't start breaking that down. It triggers the release of fatty acids to be used instead. So no matter what, unless you're trying to gain fat while building muscle, unless that's your specific goal, you should still train in a fasted state. It's going to keep you leaner and it's going to preserve some muscle. But another cool thing happens. Catecholamines actually trigger a specific contraction of our blood vessels, which sounds bad at first. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, I want to take all these like supplements to increase blood flow and all this. How come you want to contract your blood vessels? Well, it's not quite that simple. When we're fasting and this catecholamines release, the blood vessels constrict, but blood is going to be isolated more so to the larger muscles. This is going to force them to have more blood, which is going to actually increase force output. With strength comes mass alongside proper nutrition, of course. So we definitely want that. You're actually going to get stronger with your larger muscle groups, like your quads, your glutes, your chest, your back, things like that. You might feel a little bit weaker in your auxiliary muscle groups. That's not that big of a deal. The next thing that we have to talk about is mTOR. And in the gist of it, mTOR is just the anabolic signaling. What we want to do is we want to turn on mTOR at specific points in time. When mTOR is elevated, we're building muscle. We're activating protein synthesis. It may sound like you want mTOR on all the time, but you don't. Okay, you only want mTOR on at specific times, and that's why we're going to talk about when to time it and when to get those spikes. The rest of the time, you want your body burning fat. You want your body utilizing cells and actually using its own energy for energy. So mTOR works closely with insulin. Okay, so when we spike our insulin, we have high levels of mTOR. So high levels of insulin means higher levels of mTOR, which means higher levels of muscle building. Obviously, we don't want mTOR to be elevated all the time. So here's the interesting thing. When you are fasting, during your fast, your insulin levels are super low. You're not building muscle during your fast. I can almost guarantee that, okay? While you're fasting, you're just maintaining. You're preserving muscle maybe, but you're not building it. So what happens is, throughout the day, your insulin sensitivity builds, meaning you're getting more and more sensitive to insulin when you do finally spike it. So when you break your fast, you're spiking your insulin big time. So what I mean by this is you're gonna wanna make sure that your workout is towards the end of your fasting period. So if you allocate your workout to the end of your fasting period, you get to capitalize on an insulin spike in two ways. You're insulin sensitive after a workout, but then you're also insulin sensitive at the end of a fast. So you're double insulin sensitive, which means that when you do consume your protein, you do consume food, you're going to get a big spike in insulin, which means you're going to get a bigger spike in mTOR, which means you're going to get more protein synthesis at that very minute. And that's exactly what we want, specific timing. So that means when we spike our insulin with a small amount of carbohydrates or a small amount of protein, or a good amount of protein, I should say, you get the insulin spike, which means the cells become more receptive to the nutrients that are coming in. Now, of course, that's a benefit because we get more nutrient absorption at that point in time, but of course, and this has been proven in a study that was published in the journal Nutrients. They found that an increase in insulin correlated with an increase in mammalian target of rapamycin. So specifically in metabolic tissues too. So we're talking like skeletal muscle and stuff like that. Okay, leads me into the next thing. The foods that you should eat. What specific foods should you use to break your fast? Well, It's pretty simple, to be honest. We want to focus on foods that are going to increase mTOR, which are pretty basic, to be honest. Protein, lean protein, specifically leucine, the amino acid leucine, or essential amino acids, those are going to spike your overall mTOR levels. There's actually a study that was published in the Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise that found that specifically taking EAAs, that's the essential amino acids, they end up spiking insulin and mTOR in a very specific way. So exactly what we need. You don't need to go crazy on your protein intake, but you want to get your lean protein in. Now, that's not really anything to write home about. You guys probably know that. All right, the next thing that you want to be paying attention to is actually adding a small amount of omega-3s. Okay, here's the thing. This is very important. When you spike your insulin, you don't want to have a big increase in fat too. Okay, here's why. Insulin spike opens up the cell doorway. So that's great for carbs and protein because it gets shuttled in. But not the best thing for fats, right? Because we don't want to allow fats to get super absorbed at that point in time because they'll go to storage. So normally I would say keep your fats super lean. Keep them out of the equation. Keep them super small. Keep them out of the equation entirely for the most part. Just a couple of grams of high quality omega-3s. And you can get that through good quality lean protein sources. So here's the thing. There's a study that was published in the journal Clinical Science that found that supplementing with a small amount of omega-3s ended up increasing protein synthesis by 50%. Okay, what that means is that by having omega-3s in the equation, the metabolic switch to build muscle was turned on even more. However, it was only turned on in the presence of amino acids too. So a small amount of omega-3s along with a good amount of lean protein equaled a 50% increase in the protein synthesis process. Meaning, okay, combine that with the insulin spikes of allocating the workout towards the end of your fast, and we're in really good shape here. This is exactly the kind of thing we want.